Right. We are going to expand our view into JavaScript, and I'm going to use an example that I had a version of in CISS232, but we're going to expand upon it and get into more details and talk a little bit more about some of the things that you can do. And the example that we're going to cover is the spoiler example, where we have a list of statements on the screen about Star Wars, and then we have a spoiler about them. Luke Skywalker's dad is Yoda. Hide the spoiler. Toggle spoiler. Toggle spoiler will show the spoiler if it's invisible, and it will hide it if it's visible. So let's take a look at this and let's expand and see what this particular example offers us. As we know, this is the role to a large degree of client-side scripting, is to alter a page once it's already been loaded without going back to the server. In other words, when we load this page initially, I hit refresh, it loads pretty much immediately since it's a local file. If I look at the HTML, all the HTML is there. So the spoiler is there in all cases. But what is there also is JavaScript code. And that JavaScript code goes and displays a spoiler, hides a spoiler, or in this case, toggles a spoiler. So let's look at this function and let's look at some of the things that we can do and continue from there. All right. By the way, in this class, I use Visual Studio Code for this. It is simpler than Visual Studio, but it's a good solid text editor, and it does give you things like IntelliSense and so on. So if you stray a little bit, it will show you right away. So for example, if I typoed on the code ULL, actually it doesn't know that as a problem. I stand corrected. It will tell you if you forget tags and missing ending tags and so on. All right, so let's look at this page initially. Here's the HTML, which consists of a paragraph and a second paragraph for the spoiler associated with it, along with some buttons. Now, JavaScript in this case adds interactivity to the page. And by interactivity, I mean that the user does something and the page responds in a certain way. And it's JavaScript that controls the way the page responds, and it allows you to dynamically change the page without going back to the server and requesting a new copy of the page. So there's the HTML, but if you notice when the page initially loads, we don't see everything. That is because our CSS code is set to hide everything that is set to with the class of spoiler. So remember, you use a class when there's more than one item that could possibly belong in that group. So for example, there can be more than one spoiler on a page. So therefore, you can call you can put a class of spoiler and put it on all of them. And that hides all the spoilers. An alternative way without the class would be to hide each one of them individually and put in the CSS spoiler 1, display none, spoiler 2. But as you can see, that could get tedious pretty quickly, especially if you had a bunch of things that were spoilers. So that's how the page loads initially. Let's look at the first function to show the spoiler. We click on it and we show the spoiler. Now, we have a button here. It's not a submit button. Remember that. It can't be a submit button because a submit button will try to send the browser to a page on the server. We'll try to submit the form data and send it to a page on the server. Therefore, we're using a plain old button here. And we have an on-click method that says show spoiler. And then we have in parentheses spoiler 1. And that's it. So here's our JavaScript statement. Show spoiler, spoiler 1. Now, spoiler 1, notice, is the ID of the spoiler that we want to show. All right. Show spoiler is a function. And what is a function? A function is a group of statements that we put together to do a particular job. And we do that for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is for reusability of code. So for example, in this case, what we want to do is when we show the spoiler, we want to show it and we want to change the color of the text to blue. All right. Now, we're going to use this for all 3 of the spoilers, and if we had more, we would use it for all of those spoilers. That saves us from having to write the instruction or instructions right as part of the on-click event. That can be kind of unwieldy, hard to read, and hard to maintain. Remember, one of your goals as a developer is to make your page easy to maintain, that is to change it, because you know that at some point in the future, you're going to need to change the content of your page. You're going to need to change it to do something different. Therefore, we're going to try to write our code in such a way that makes it easy to change. So if we want to add a new spoiler here, all we would have to do is give it a new ID and change this. And that new spoiler would work just like the other ones did. Oh. I have it same as the other one, just to differentiate. I'll make it answer. All right. So more about these functions. All right. More about these functions. We mentioned that a function is a group of statements that we're going to put in a single place on our page that we're going to invoke from different places on the page. So to use a function, there's 2 things that happen. The first thing that happens is you define the function. You say that I have a function called ShowSpoiler, and here are the instructions that happen when it gets called or invoked. Here is where we're actually calling the function. So where do we define it? We define it up here within the head, typically. Within the head. Within a script tag, we can put JavaScript script statements. And a function starts with the word function. We have the name of the function. we have any arguments, and we'll come to the meaning of the arguments in a minute here. We have our braces, which designate the beginning and end of the function. And then in here, we have all the statements that we're going to do. Here, just for fun, I did two things. I made it display and made the color of it blue. It's not obvious that the color changes because we can't see it. We can't see that originally it was black, but we change it to blue when we make it visible. All right, so what is an argument? An argument is a piece of data that you send when you call a function to designate what you want to perform the function on. All right. And if you've done Excel, you know functions already, or you know part of functions. So I could put a number in here. And I could put a formula here. And in that formula, we're going to put a function. And I'm just putting in the square root function. But I have to say the square root of what? I can't simply say, give me the square root. All right? That doesn't make any sense. Give me the square root of what? This cell, this cell, this cell. We have to specify what we want the square root of. So we have to supply this function with an argument. And in the case of Excel, we give it the cell that we want to get the square root of. So I can put in A1. And then it works. All right. Now, in this case, we're doing one of the things that we do in JavaScript. That is, we're calling the functions. In this case, we have not written the square root function. The square root function is something that the developers of Excel wrote and integrated into the language. So all you have to do is say square root. You don't have to define what a square root is. Now in JavaScript, there are some built-in functions, and we'll look at those in a second here. This is an example of a built-in function. In other words, we don't define this function. That's built into the language. But ShowSpoiler, there's no such thing in the JavaScript language of a ShowSpoiler function. Therefore, we have to define it. And here's how we define it. Function, the name of the function, the arguments. The arguments perform the same purpose that they do as the functions in Excel. In other words, what do we do this function on? Show spoiler, which spoiler do we want to show? And it gets passed to the function when we call the function. So if I say show spoiler, spoiler 1, then spoiler 1 gets put in this variable ID spoiler. Think of variables as a memory location that has a name. When you use variables, you do not enclose them in quotes. So this means whatever the ID that is contained in this variable ID spoiler. When there's quotes around this, what that means is I want that exact value. This is not a variable. I literally want the letters spoiler to be put in that memory location. Notice too, when I call this function, I have two different kinds of quotes. I have double quotes to designate the beginning and end of the JavaScript snippet. And I have single quotes to designate the string that I'm using as an argument. So when I call this function, this gets put in, spoiler 1 gets put into here. We then go and say, find a thing on the page that has an element ID equal to the value of the variable ID spoiler and change its display to block. Do the same thing, except change the style to blue. What if we wanted to change the background color? Well, we could do something like this. We say background color like that, we can set it to yellow, let's say. Notice that when we have multiple words, in CSS, how do we designate the background color? It's background dash color. In JavaScript, we do not use the dash to specify properties. Instead, we use the capitalization of every word after the first. So if we were going to use JavaScript to refer to this property, we would say background color with a capital C. That's exactly what we did here. Other than that, the style properties are the same properties that we define up here. So color green, background red, background color red. It's not like these things coincidentally match up with these things. These are the exact same properties. And we change it in JavaScript by pointing to the thing that we want to change, often using getElementById. We give it the ID, and we say we want to change the style, and then we say what attribute of the style do we want to change, and then we give it a value. And the value, if it's enclosed in quotes, is a literal. It's exactly those letters. We want to change it to block. If we want to change it to the value of a variable, we would put the value of the variable in there by not putting that in quotes, and then it would be the value of the variable. Okay. Hide spoiler is the same thing, except we set the display back to none. Now, these are all invoked by the onClick event. I could make it to say on mouse over, and then the spoiler would be shown when the user puts their mouse on top of that button. And I could put on mouse out. Okay, then it would behave like this. Put the mouse on it. Take the mouse off of it. Mouse on, mouse off. Now, if you think about it, that is really not too far from the pull-down menus that you see on Lorain Community College's website. Mouse on, it appears. Mouse off, it disappears. So this example, we could very easily create pull-down menus simply by making this a little more complicated and adding more stuff to it. But the basics of the JavaScript would remain the same. Would be able to show things and hide things by doing something like this. Now, let's look at the toggle spoiler. The toggle spoiler is a little more involved because we have an if statement at the beginning of it. We have to determine if the spoiler is shown or not shown. Let me get it back to where it was, otherwise this mouse over would drive me crazy. So we have an if statement. An if statement in programming allows you to branch between two paths of code. It allows you to check to see if some variable has a certain value. And if it's true, we do one thing. If it's false, we do something else. In this case, if the style display value, and that's an attribute of the style of the item called ID spoiler on the web page, is none or is equal to an empty string. I don't completely understand why I had to put that in, but I did have to put this in to work. The two vertical lines indicate or. So one of these two have to be true. Well, only one of them could be true, but one of them has to be true. And if it's true, if it's not being displayed, we display it. If it is being displayed, we hide it. So we come in the first time and we see that it's not visible. So we display it. We click it a second time, we see that this condition is not true. It's not invisible. Therefore, we show it, or we hide it again, rather, because it is being displayed. Now, there's a few things I want to mention. Common problems in JavaScript. Because unfortunately, when you get an error in JavaScript, it doesn't give you necessarily a very obvious error message. Also, you need to look for the error message because it's not going to display on your window. Let's say, for example, I forget this second brace. Notice the way an if statement works. We have an if, we have in parentheses a condition. We then have braces to indicate the true part, the word else, and then braces to indicate the false part. Now I'm going to say just for example, what if I forget this? What's going to happen? I'll save that. Refresh the page. I click on it, what happens? Nothing happens. All right. Why does nothing happen? Because our JavaScript is broke. We missed a brace here. And it would be great if the error message said that you missed a brace. But it's not going to tell you that plainly. Let's look for the JavaScript error. And most browsers have this capability. I'm going to show you on Chrome, which has a good set of developers tools. So I'm going to click on this little 3-dot thing to pull down tools. I'm going to click on more tools. I'm going to click developers tools. Then I'm going to look at the console. The console is where errors go. All right. And let's see what the error messages say, because they're not very clear. The first error message, if you can't read it, it says syntax error, unexpected end of input. That's cryptic. Second says is that toggle spoiler is not defined. Well, that doesn't seem right. Toggle spoiler is definitely defined. Well, let's view it from the browser's perspective. It tells you that unexpected end of input because it's expecting there, because we have a start brace, is expecting to have the same number of start braces as end braces. So we have those match up, those match up, these two match up, these two match up, but there's none that matches up with this. Actually, from the browser perspective, this matches up with this, and there's nothing that matches up with this one. So it reached the end of the script tag, and it's still waiting for there to be a closing brace. That's what the error message means, unexpected end of input. It means it was expecting something that it didn't get, and it reached the end of the script tag. All right. A lot of times when you see that error, you're missing, or you're missing a brace. This gives us a clue about where you might be missing a brace, because it's telling us that toggle spoiler is not defined. Well, the way JavaScript works, if there's an error in this block of code, it doesn't recognize that function. There's an error in the line of code, it just doesn't know toggle spoiler because that was not correctly loaded as the script tag was processed. Now the other ones work still. Oh, no, it doesn't. I stand corrected. In fact, it doesn't know anything about this script because there's an error in it. So it doesn't know anything about those functions that are declared here. I stand corrected on that. So the fix, of course, is to add back in the brace, and everything will work happy after that. So we add the brace back in, refresh, show spoiler, hide spoiler, toggle spoiler. And you see by looking at the console, we see no errors, so everything is going okay. That's one kind of error that you can make. And really, if you use a tool like Visual Studio Code, it actually helps you out, because you can see that the braces are color coded. This one goes with this, this one goes with this, but this brace is missing an ending brace. So the color coding can help you. The other thing I would recommend is that you indent properly. Indent like I have in this example. In other words, the function is the contents of the function is indented within the function. So at a glance, I can see these three statements are the function. And those are the braces that wrap around it. You don't have to indent. You could write all this code in as one line of code, and the browser would understand it just perfectly. The problem is that if you didn't, or the problem is if you did make an error somewhere in there, then it would be very difficult for you to read to figure out where the error is. So I'm not a neat person in real life, all right? Get a little bit sloppy sometimes. However, I strive to make my code very clean and very easy to read, because you never know when you have to change it. You never know when you have to fix a problem. And by having the code indented properly, nested properly, you can easily or more easily see where a problem is and find it and correct it. So that's one possibility, missing brace. The key to the missing brace, again, is it's going to probably say something like it's reached the end of the input. If you see that, something's missing, and most often it's going to be one of those braces. Now, what happens if you have an extra brace? Notice again, the color coding in Visual Studio tells me that guy's red. There's nothing that matches up with it. Let's say we are not using Visual Studio Code, or we don't notice that. And again, we get sort of the same thing. Instead of saying unexpected and, it says unexpected token. What that means is it got something that it didn't expect. Unexpected and means it didn't get something that it thought it would. Unexpected token means it got something that it didn't think it needed. And in this case, obviously, it is the extra brace. Other common JavaScript errors. JavaScript is case sensitive. And let's see how that works. Let's change this to ShowSpoiler, like that. That error, it doesn't know until you click on it, because that could be correct. We could have a function called ShowSpoiler, and we're not going to find out until we click on it. When we click on it, it's going to tell us ShowSpoiler is not defined. Well, sure it is. It's defined up here. Oh, but it has a capital S. What if I say get element by ID? Uncaught type error. Document get element by ID is not a function. Again, well, we use that in class. It should be a function. Well, we did use that in class. However, it was with a lowercase d. What if we get this wrong? If I don't type in the right value, instead of block, I say block style. Doesn't do anything. All right. Now that's a little disheartening, right? Because you would hope that it would tell you, hey, block style is not a valid attribute. Well, here's the thing. Because it's a string, we can put anything we want to in here. And the browser doesn't know until it tries to do it if that's a valid CSS property or not. And you might think, well, gee, that's kind of dumb. I wish it would know. It should be able to tell that that's not defined. Well, People that created JavaScript allowed for the introduction of more CSS attributes into CSS without having to change JavaScript. So no, it doesn't know until it tries. And it tries, it gets it wrong. How are you going to tell that? Well, that's a good question. All right, how are you going to be able to tell that? One thing you can do is you can put console log statements in your code to make sure the statements are being called that you think are. Let's say, for example, and again, in a small program, it's kind of absurd, but let's say I have the wrong function name here. So it's like, well, am I even calling ShowSpoiler? I can put in an instruction that looks like this, console log, and some descriptive phrase. Run it. I click show spoiler and I don't get that message. Well, that tells me that that code is not being called. So I look, oh, I put hide spoiler there. I probably copied and pasted wrong. Let's put show spoiler in. That tells me I'm in that show spoiler function. Unfortunately, it doesn't tell us this. And we would have to look at this, but at least we have it narrowed down to a section of code. It's like, well, what controls the display? This line does. Is this correct? No, it isn't. What if we give it the wrong spoiler ID? There is no spoiler 11. Cannot read property of null. All right, tells us a line. Line is line 14. They got called at line 36. So line 14 is telling us that this is null. In other words, there exists nothing on the page that has an ID of ID spoiler, and that got the value of this. Now, it's going to take you a while to recognize these. You know, I'm making up the errors, so therefore I know what's wrong. When you're debugging code for real, sometimes it gets difficult to find the cause of the error, and the error messages can be a little cryptic. So these are some guidelines for you for things to check. Check to make sure the case, check to make sure you have the right number of braces. Those are two things right off the bat that can mess things up. Check to make things are spelled right. All right. And if it tells you a line that the error is on, know that the error is probably somewhere near that line. Doesn't always have to be exactly on that line. It could be somewhere else. Okay. Now you notice this toggle, if it's invisible, it shows it. If it's not invisible, it hides it. I could actually make this a little better, believe it or not. I've already have a function that hides and shows them, so I could call show spoiler and pass ID spoiler here. Ends with a semicolon. Why is that better? It's better because every place that I'm showing and hiding I'm doing from within these two functions. And therefore, like this makes sure that I do the other things too. Change the colors. Let's think for a second. If you wanted to show all of the spoilers, let's put a button on the page. Spell. That doesn't require any arguments. Why? Well, because I want to show them all. I don't have to say which one. Forgot the equal sign though. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to create my function. No arguments. And right today, in the interest of time, I'm going to use the brute force method. I'm actually just going to call my show spoiler function 4 times. Now, if any of you remember Pee Wee Herman, specifically Pee Wee Herman's show, he always had on his show a word of the day. And the word of the day, what was supposed to happen is, as a kid watching his show, you were supposed to scream. All right. Now, as a programmer, there's something else that causes you to scream. All right. Well, as a programmer, there's a lot of things that cause you to scream, but here's one of them. When you notice essentially repeated code, I'm doing the exact same thing 4 times. That's a sign to you that there might be a better way to do it. That ought to be a sign to you that there might be a better way to do it. Now, this will work. And we could do a hide one the same way. This will work. However, if we added a 5th spoiler, we'd have to change this function to show the 5th spoiler. Now, is that a big deal? Maybe, maybe not. Well, what if we added 100 spoilers? Well, it'd be nice if we wrote code where we did have to repeat the same instruction 100 times. So there is a way, there are ways that we could, instead of doing it this way, we could write code to get a list of all the spoilers and loop through those. And we'll talk about that next time. It's a little bit better way to do this. The way that you judge if some way is a better way to do that is to think, if something changed, how difficult would it be to change the code? And with this, if we added a spoiler or got rid of a spoiler, we'd have to change 2 things. We'd have to add the spoiler and we'd have to change our show all spoilers function. If we could get it down where we didn't have to change the show all spoilers function, that would be great. All right. So that's what we're going to try to think of as we go forward on this. Now, I want to talk about your next assignment, and let's look at your next assignment. I want you to take what you did for lab 1, change it to have 3 tabs, 1 for each topic. Everything should be on 1 page, and as you click on each tab, it should show you the content for the specific tab we're hiding the other topics. So I'm reviewing just to make sure you understand what tabs are. Here's an example of tabs on a web page. Notice that we have, and it's a great saver of space. Rather than having a page for course details, a page for sections, a page for navigation, for apps, for feature options, and integration, we have 1 page that contains all these topics. We have tabs on the top of the page. And when we click the tab, it makes visible a different topic. And it hides all the other topics. So you're going to do something like that. You're going to have all 3 topics on your page. Through CSS, you're going to make only 1 visible. So you'll make the first one visible. You're going to have 3 links on the top of the page, or 3 buttons, depending on how you do it. When you click on the link, don't go to another page, but instead call your JavaScript function that's going to hide all of them and then show the one that you want to show. Are there any questions? All right. That's all I had today. If you have any questions, you're welcome to see me in lab or send me an email. All right. We'll talk to you later.